Alright guys, welcome back to another video, and today we're here to talk about the recently thing that I got, which I've done a video on already talking about my first impressions, which is the Asus Rog Ally, the new handhelds from Asus, versus the Steam Deck that I've had for a while. And in this video I want to compare both of them for you guys, kind of talk about my feelings about it, what I've experienced so far, what the differences are between these devices, and then let you know ultimately which one I'm going to be keeping for myself, so stay tuned for that, and what I think I recommend for the rest of you guys out there as well. So let's go ahead and get into the video.
Gaming tech, eating brekkie is the gaming tech. Going for a brekkie is the gaming tech. Gaming tech is the gaming tech. Gaming techie.
Alright guys, so the first thing I want to talk about when we compare the Steam Deck and the Asus Rog Ally is the price of both of these. So the Steam Deck that we have right here retails for, you could get this for $400 if you get the one that has the least space, but I would assume that most people are probably getting the other one for $650, which is the one that comes with the 512 gigabytes of storage and the carrying case and all that kind of stuff. And that's the one that I have here that we're looking at. When we compare that to the Asus Ally, this one obviously costs $699. There is going to be a $600 model when it comes to these things that is going to come out later, which is basically going to have a less powerful processor. But right now, what we have is this one here in front of us again. So essentially, we're talking about a $50 difference between the most popular Steam Deck, I would assume, out there to this one. And so that's something to bear in mind when you're considering both of these devices, is that when you look at it that way, and if you're looking at the higher end Steam Deck model, these are a lot closer in price than they may first appear when you first look at it, even though obviously there is a $400 Steam Deck model that you could get that still has the same horsepower as what the regular Steam Deck would have, because everything else as far as those specs go are the same. Moving on from the actual battery, we're going to talk about the actual layout and stuff of how this thing looks like. So you can see this is the Asus Ally here. You can see it has these speaker grills right here in front. It has the digital D-pad right there, the analog sticks. You can tell that the analog sticks are obviously a little off-centered, unlike what the Steam Deck is like that you see right here, which obviously is, you know, completely centered. So that's obviously going to be a preference thing for me. I can go back and forth without really complaining about either way. I don't have any issues with either one. I will say that the D-pad on the Steam Deck is definitely better on the Steam Deck than the one that feels in the Asus Ally. They're both serviceable and they both do their job, but if I were to prefer one, I would definitely prefer the one on the Steam Deck as far as how that control feels. The same thing with the buttons. The buttons on the Asus Ally here feel fine. They have a good click to them. Haven't had any issues with them or anything about having any performance issues or anything getting stuck or anything like I saw early reports say. Mine have been really solid, but when comparing it to the Steam Deck, again, I do feel like these buttons have a little bit of a better feel to them when I'm comparing it straight across. And one of the other things that the Steam Deck has that a lot of people like is, of course, the digital trackpads that we have right here. And this is really useful when you're in Windows. It basically, picture this as being like your mouse pad and your left click and right click over here. And these are really, really useful to use, for mouse games, even if you're playing, something like The Sims or something and you want to use these trackpads, or if you're just in Linux, manipulating settings and stuff like that. And obviously on the Asus Ally, unfortunately, there is nothing like that. So when you're in Windows, you're going to have to either use the touchscreen or the analog sticks and all that kind of stuff, which still works perfectly fine. But again, definitely a point to the Steam Deck here as far as having these digital trackpads here that perform really, really well. And I really like having these, on the Steam Deck, and I wish it was something that was on the Asus Ally for sure. Moving along from that, we definitely got to talk about the actual screen themselves. And before we talk about the screen, since this is off, you can see that when you turn it on, you actually have a fingerprint reader, so you can use that to log in, which the Steam Deck does not have. So that's a pretty nice feature here to just log in with your fingerprint. But the actual screen, and I don't know how much this is going to come across on here on the video, but it's night and day when it comes to the difference of the quality of the screen. Now, even though that these screens are technically the same, they have an IPS screen. Even though this is a 1080p screen, of course, on the Asus Ally, where the Steam Deck has a 720p screen. We're not even talking about resolution. I'm just talking about the colors and the contrast and stuff. Just even looking at this main menu here, you can see how the colors pop and pop off the screen and stuff like that, and they have a really good look to them playing games. The colors and contrasts are definitely much better on here than they are on the Steam Deck, where they look a little bit more dull. I mean, just looking at that right there, as I zoom in here, you can tell on the Steam Deck that the colors definitely don't pop off the screen anywhere near as much as what they do, on the Asus Ally. And that's before we talk about resolution of this thing. Like I said, the Asus Ally has a 1080p screen, so you're going to get, games to look better and stuff like that because of that higher resolution. But of course, it's going to demand more power. than the Steam Deck does, because the Steam Deck is running a 720p resolution. And of course, in the Asus Ally, you can also just manipulate the settings and make it run at 720p. And lower that if you want on the resolution, and games still look fantastic on here if you want to do 720p to save some of those FPS for other high quality settings, and just run the same 720p resolution, because obviously this is a smaller screen, so 720p for the most part on a 7-inch screen is going to be relatively more than fine. And also, the screen on the Asus Ally has a 120 hertz refresh rate. Now, the Steam Deck is obviously 60 hertz, and I know a lot of people are going to be like, why would I care about 120 hertz resolution on here? Well, you're going to care because even though most AAA games that you're playing are not going to obviously reach that level, for games that do go over 60, it's going to be that much, that much smoother. And this does support AMD FreeSync as well, so everything is going to be really, really solid no matter what frames per second it's running. But when you get above that 60, for example, Fall Guys for me runs at about 80 or 90 at all maxed out. Call of Duty, you can get this to easily run at over 70 to 80 FPS depending on your settings. Disney Speedstorm, same exact thing. So there's going to be plenty of games that if you want to manipulate the settings and get that 120 frames per second, you're going to be able to do by lowering some of the settings, running it at 720p resolution and stuff like that. And that's just a preference thing. If you want to play, Call of Duty at 720p because you want to get that, closer to that 120 frames per second, you can by manipulating those settings, and it's great to have that option here depending on what kind of games you're playing. Where on the Steam Deck, it is only sitting at 60 hertz, so that's the only thing you can actually use. As far as the performance goes on these things, I've been putting this through its paces for the last few days, and obviously I've been using the Steam Deck for a while, and you definitely get the performance boost on here. A lot of people in the beginning were complaining because they were like, oh, this is not as good as they expected, because they were using older firmware and the updates weren't all done. But now that Asus finally got its act together after all those early reviews came out and they updated this thing, things are a lot more on par. So you can go into the settings here, and they do have a turbo mode or a silence mode, but if you put it at performance mode, which is 15 watts of power, which is the same thing the Steam Deck has, it can go up to 15 watts of power as well, and you kind of leave them both the same, the Asus Rog Ally usually outperforms it anywhere from 10% to about 50% better than it does on the Steam Deck. It varies from game to game, of course, when it comes to that stuff, but that's kind of the performance you can expect. And then you can even get higher frames getting into that 50% mark if you go into turbo mode, which is 25 watts, which the Steam Deck can't do at all. And then if you want to plug this in, you can actually go to 30 watts as well, and even push it a little bit further if you want to do the manual setting. So a lot of customizability here, and I've been really impressed with what I can get on here. For example, on Disney Speedstorm, a game that I've been playing a lot on my Steam Deck because I've been really obsessed with that game, I usually get about 40 to 50 frames per second at everything maxed out at 720p. On the Disney Speedstorm version here, I can go at 1080p with everything maxed out and get, somewhere around the 50 to 60 FPS mark in Disney Speedstorm, depending on the track and stuff. So it is obviously a really big boost, especially with the fact that I'm running at a higher resolution than I was on the Steam Deck, and I'm able to run a lot more games, a higher FPS, so it's obviously great to see. Like I said, Fall Guys running at 80 FPS when I'm playing that game. Call of Duty, I can sit there and run it at about 50 to 60 FPS with, the different settings that I have. It's not fully maxed out, but it is at 1080p resolution with some of the settings, manipulated and stuff to kind of fit the needs of the screen, and it runs super, super well. Diablo 4 1080p at maxed out settings, I've been running pretty solidly. All of these games that I have on here have run extremely well, and they're all going to get obviously better performance that's on the Steam Deck, but of course, that doesn't obviously tell the whole entire story. Because we also got to talk about the fact that they're running two different operating systems. Of course, the Steam Deck here is running SteamOS, which is obviously running Linux, and here we're running Windows, so this is running a Windows 11 version like you would on a regular PC, and there's both benefits and cons that come with those things that we're going to talk about here. So coming along with the Steam Deck here is going to set this thing apart for people is the fact that when you use this thing, it actually feels like a console. So I relate this more like if you had a Nintendo Switch, but it was more powerful, because when you use this, everything on here is going to be games that are on Steam. So obviously you can't usually play other things besides with Steam, unless if you go in there and start manipulating stuff. But just staying on category with that, when you're looking at these, things are going to run much better because it's all on the Linux platform. Steam's controlling it. They let you know, if the game is actually compatible or not with the Steam Deck compatibility, so you'll know if it's verified or not and how well the game performs. and everything is going to be easy to use. And you can still go into the full version of Windows if you want to, and go into, desktop and go into Linux. But of course, that's Linux that you're dealing with and not Windows. So you're not going to be able to do as much as you could on a Windows platform. But again, the caveat to that is things here are just going to work like it would a console for the most part. Obviously, you still may run into some issues on the Steam Deck. I had before too. But generally, overall, this is more of a console-like experience where you click on a game, if it's verified or says it's playable, it's going to be that way, and you're not going to have to, manipulate settings or worry about games crashing as much, all that kind of stuff, especially with that verified for deck compatibility on the Steam Deck. Where if I switch over to the Asus Ally, this is more, even though it is a handheld device, this is definitely more for the power user in my opinion, because you're going to get into here, and sure, you're going to have, the crate, command center that we'll talk about here in a little bit, but you're going to be sitting on the desktop here, and you're going to have a full version of Windows 10 as you guys are looking at here. So that's both a positive and a negative at the same time, because that means that, sure, you can go in here and play any game you want. So games on the Steam Deck that I wasn't able to play before, games like Destiny 2, like Call of Duty, like Riders Republic, some of those games that had anti-cheat measures weren't able to run on the Steam Deck, or you had to jump through a lot of hoops to get them to run. On here, they're just going to work because obviously this is a full Windows 11 machine, and you don't have to worry about the anti-cheat measures on Linux or anything like that. Things are going to work. The game compatibility is going to be a lot wider than it is on the Steam Deck. You're not going to just be playing Steam games. You can use whatever launcher you want. However, coming with that on Windows 11, that means that you're going to have to deal with things like you would on a regular PC. It is not going to be like a regular console experience where games are just going to work. I was playing Call of Duty, but and other games, but there's sometimes where I have to go in and it crashes just like it would on a PC, and you're like, why is this game crashing? Then you have to go in there, go and search on forums, figure out why it's crashing, and then manipulate settings, go into folders, delete files, edit INI files and stuff like that for some of the games and get them to work. But that's no different than a regular Windows 10 platform or a regular Windows 11 computer. But I think for people who are expecting this to just be, a handheld device, you are going to run into some issues. Obviously, there are going to be games that run with no issues at all, and you're going to be able to just come in here and, just play them. I can say that, like, for example, Disney Dreamlight Valley, I played, no issues with that. Disney Speedstorm, it just loaded up and had no issues at all. Forza Horizon, same exact thing. I was able to log into that. Hades, no issues at all, and got that to work. Having Xbox Game Pass on here and being able to play them, fantastic, right from Game Pass. Something that you can't do directly on the Steam Deck. So that's all well and good, but there are going to be games that you're going to have to manipulate and figure out what's wrong. For example, I played Fall Guys today. When it launched the actual game and I went in there and tried to play it, it actually popped up for my birthday and I couldn't get it to work. And what I had to do basically is go into the control center here and switch from control mode to desktop mode and bring up the keyboard and use the back trigger to actually be able to manipulate the mouse and use that drop down. Obviously these are little things, but some other games, Call of Duty was a little bit more of a pain. I had to go into actual settings and go into the folder structure and do a couple of setting changes to actually get the game to run, because obviously or else it would crash. So, and that's just the games that I've played so far. I have a lot more games to test that I'm going to be testing on here in the future, but I think for me, I'm perfectly fine with that. I use Windows 10 all the time, and I love manipulating settings. I love having the ability that, I can have a full Windows 11 machine with me. I can use that for emulators and stuff like that and have a wider compatibility with emulators because it's a Windows platform. Same thing with the games and being able to play any game I want, like Destiny 2. But that's going to come with the caveat that sometimes games are going to crash and you're going to have to figure them out. And sometimes you're going to waste more time figuring out how to get a game to work before you actually play it. Where if you pick up the Steam Deck, if you've played the game before, things are just going to work. And keeping in mind also is updates. When I got this thing, there was a million updates to do, and I had to do it from a variety of different ways. First, I had to update Armoury Crate, which is on here, which is an application that's on here that we still have to talk about. Then I had to go into Windows and update that. Then I had to update the graphics driver through, the Asus platform. And then I had to update the BIOS on this thing. All the things that you're used to on a regular Windows computer, but it's obviously going to be something you're going to have to deal with if you have something like this. Where on the Steam Deck, you literally just go into the settings here, as you can see here, and you go into system, and if there's updates, and you're just applying them, and that's it, you're done, and there's no more updates to actually do. You're kind of all ready to go. So obviously different competing platforms both offer their pros and cons depending on what you're looking for out of a handheld device that you have with you. Speaking of that is also the fact that we have SteamOS on here like I talked about before, so that's going to give you some benefits. Obviously the interface is completely designed to be on a handheld device as you guys are looking at here, so that's going to give you your access to your whole entire library. For example, I love that I can just go in here and see my whole entire Steam Deck library, whether it's installed or not, and everything is all in one place because it's all on here and it's on Steam Deck. And if I click on a game, I can see all my activity because obviously Steam Deck is my preferred platform on PC. I can see the community tab, all that stuff is there. You can see the compatibility, like we talked about, if it's compatible with Steam Deck. You can, as soon as you turn the Steam Deck on, your games will all update if they need to right from here. You don't have to worry about that. You got all your notifications. SteamOS was obviously built for a handheld device on here. When you come to here, Asus did their best because obviously this is running on a Windows platform and they have their own version, which again, like we talked about before, is going to be called Armoury Crate. And basically that's this button right here that I just clicked on. And here is your game library. And what they did is, obviously on here, you can have a variety of games from different platforms like Steam, like, the Epic, like Ubisoft, like Xbox Game Pass on Windows. So they basically curate all your games that you have installed on all those different platforms and put them all in one place, which, to be fair, is awesome. The fact that, this is on Xbox Game Pass, as you can see the logo, this is running from Steam Deck, this is running from the Ubisoft launcher, stuff like that. So that's great that they're all in here, but it does mean that it's only gonna show what's installed. So you can't just come in here and see every single game you have. If you want to do that, you're gonna have to go into individual launchers. You're gonna have to go into the desktop. You're gonna have to open up Steam and look at Steam if you want to. You're gonna have to go into the Ubisoft launcher and look at games from there to install it. Once they're installed, you're good to go, obviously, and you'll be able to see them on here. But it's a very different experience than what it is on the Steam Deck, and it's definitely not going to be as user-friendly as it would be that you maybe want out of a console and handheld on here. And then besides the library here, you have a bunch of different controls. So this is fantastic on here. I can go in here and have my own controls for different, games. So if I have a game that I want to have buttons, you can configure the buttons to do whatever you want and remap them in any way you want, which is great. You can have the operating mode that I talked about before. You can set it to whatever you want, whether it's 15 watts, 25 watts, or the 30 watts. You can customize that by game, and then it saves those profiles, and then you can have that profile launch immediately as you're playing a game, which is great. And then you also have these things here, which is the command center, which shows you a bunch of different quick settings that you can get to from inside the game at any time. And then here is just a bunch of settings here. This is the update center to keep the Armoury Crate up to date, which is what this software is called. The different gaming platforms that are on here and different settings that you can manipulate and stuff like that, which is great. And then, like I said, you can open up, these are the quick settings that you can open up, and you can access this from the game anytime you want. Manipulate the brightness, the speaker volume, power it off right from here. The turbo mode, you can change at all times. The gaming profiles, you can see a real-time monitor like you see right here, which is great, so I can see what the FPS is anytime I want. Change the resolution on the fly, have AMD RSR on there, show the desktop anytime you want, change the refresh rate from 60 to 120, microphone on and off. So all these are great options to have on the fly. Same thing that the Steam Deck has on their version, which is exactly why it's on there. That this comes up on the Steam Deck when you press this button. These are the quick settings on here, and then you can manipulate whatever settings you want. This is obviously a similar idea, but obviously on the Steam Deck, there's different things that you have on there that's great. Access to your friends list anytime you want. You're not going to have access to your friends list as easily on here because it's all dependent on what OS you're using. You might have to open up Steam to access your friends from Steam, or open up Ubisoft and chat from there, and Xbox and stuff like that. So again, it is exactly like a full-on Windows 10 platform or Windows 11 platform. I will also say something else that I want to mention here is that the fans on here are whisper quiet, especially if you're running at the 15 watts that the Steam Deck runs. You don't hear the fans at all. You will hear the fans a little bit when you're running on turbo mode, especially when you're connected to power. You will hear them, but they're still never as loud as they have been on the Steam Deck. Something that we all know is just something we all deal with on the Steam Deck. All right, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed that video of comparisons between the Asus Rog Ally and the Steam Deck. So what this comes down to is, for me, I will be selling off my Steam Deck. So, and I'm going to tell you guys why I came to that conclusion after talking about everything I talked about here. Obviously, there's pros and cons to both, but ultimately, for me, I have no problem using Windows. I use it all the time. I have a gaming PC, and when you get the games to work, they're going to continue to work. Obviously, on Windows, you're going to deal with issues like I talked about before, where games may crash and stuff like that. And you may have to deal with the fact that you have to update games on different platforms and different, areas and stuff like that for your games, as opposed to just on Steam Deck. It's just one place. But if I have Disney Dreamlight working today and I get it set up, and then whatever other game, Diablo 4 and stuff like that, it's going to continue to work for the majority of the time. You're not going to be. It's not like it's going to be working one day and crashing another. It's going to work the same way it would on a Windows 11 PC. In the beginning, when you first install it, sometimes you may have to deal with some random issues that you may have to fix, which I did for a couple of the games that I talked about already, like Call of Duty, like Fallout, and stuff like that. But once you get past that and you figure it out the first time and you do whatever you need to do, even if it takes you some time to figure it out, it's no different than what I do on my Windows 11 machine. And yes, I know some people out there, which is where I'm going to come from on this, aren't going to want that in a handheld experience. A lot of people are just going to want to pick up a handheld and say, hey, I want to play this and I want it to just work at all times and not have to worry about graphics driver updates or, updating all these games on different platforms, or hey, the game's crashing today and I don't know why, a recent update broke it, how do I need to go in there and fix it? That stuff is definitely going to happen more on a Windows based machine than it would on the Steam Deck, and those are something that's something you guys need to understand and know. But for me, there's a few reasons why I'd still pick this over the Steam Deck, but that's for my personal preference. One, that screen is night and day difference. Not because of the resolution, that's even better, but the actual screen quality. Like I said, it is much better than the Steam Deck, and that's a big deal because you're playing this thing handheld. So the fact that it's a nicer screen with way better colors and contrast is obviously a great thing. And the fact that it's 1080p resolution is just a bonus on top of there. And then the fact that because it's running Windows 10 for me, I get to play games like Call of Duty and like Destiny 2 that I can't play on the Steam Deck at all, which obviously is awesome, and I've been playing Call of Duty on this thing and it runs fantastic and it's so much fun to actually play. And not only playing those games, but then I love the fact that I have more power to play with, playing the games that I know and love already and just being able to play them at 1080p or playing them at higher fidelity graphics is obviously awesome, and I'm obviously really happy with that. And the fact that it's Windows 10 for me means that, there's mod support out there, so you can sometimes mod games and stuff like that if you want to go that route. Emulators and stuff are going to be easier to run and manipulate with because there's a lot more that's developed for Windows than it is for Steam Deck, even though obviously the stuff has picked up on Steam Deck because it's been really popular. But generally, the emulators and stuff like that, you're going to be able to do more on PC than you would on Linux when you get into some of those higher emulation things like TechnoParrot and stuff like that. So for me, this thing has been a huge win, and I love the Asus Rog Ally. It's something that I really like. The only thing I can really complain about with this thing right now is the battery life, and I think I can complain about that on both fronts because I don't think I mentioned it in the overview there, but the battery life on the Steam Deck and the Asus Rog Ally is pretty similar when you compare it 15 watts on each. With the latest updates that Asus has done, they're pretty on par, give or take 5 or 10 minutes, where the Steam Deck might pull ahead a little bit, but I wouldn't pick one over the other based on the battery life after all the updates that they've done. At 15 watts, it's pretty close. It's not going to make or break your decision. You could get 2 hours on the Ally if depending on the games that you're playing, and if you're playing at 15 watts, the same thing you can on the Steam Deck. Again, sometimes the Steam Deck comes out a few minutes ahead, but nothing that I would write home about. That's basically what's holding this technology back is, if you want to play this thing at turbo mode, like I showed you guys in the video, you're going to get an hour's worth of battery life out of this thing before you need to plug in. So you're going to have to, lower the settings down if you're obviously on an airplane or something and play it at 15 watts and lower the settings, because or else you're only going to get an hour's worth of battery life as opposed to, a little under 2 hours, which you obviously want. Or you're going to have to be plugged in. Obviously on an airplane, there's a lot of planes now that have plugs and stuff like that. If you're near an outlet, plug in, do that thing at turbo at 30 watts and, crank up those games, which is what I'm going to do. I've been playing the Asus Ally pretty much always plugged in because what's the point? I have the plug right next to me in bed. I plug it in. I'm always playing it that way. When I go to a family or friend's house, I kind of do the same thing. If I ever want to play it handheld, then I'll play it handheld without being plugged in. But that's the only thing I can complain about, and that's an issue across a lot of pieces of technology. Is the batteries are out there are just holding our technology back. Even VR headsets are in the same issue. Like, can't wait till we have batteries kind of up there. We figure out battery and we get batteries that are lasting much longer than what they're doing on now. But other than that, the Steam Deck is still a fantastic device. Whoever has a Steam Deck, don't think it's all of a sudden a piece of garbage or anything. I love mine. I still did. And the only reason I'm not keeping both is because I don't have the budget for both. I don't have a reason to keep both. I know I'm not going to use both. The Steam Deck is going to be playing the same games that I would in the Asus Rog Ally, but the Asus has more power and a better screen, so why would I ever pick up the Steam Deck? I'm just not going to do it. So I'd rather sell it off, get my money's worth, and use it towards the Ally and kind of leave it at bay. But if you guys have the Steam Deck and you're really happy with it, and then your whole library is sitting on Steam anyway, wait for the Steam Deck too. But if you're on Windows and you like playing games on different platforms like me, you're okay with manipulating Windows settings and stuff like that because you already do it on a gaming platform anyway, and you're okay with doing it on a device like this, then I would say go for it because you're going to be really impressed with the performance that this thing provides, and the screen quality upgrade over the Steam Deck is definitely going to be a big deal when you obviously compare them side by side. So that is my comparison, guys, on the Steam Deck versus the Asus Rog Ally. If you guys have any questions about anything you guys have seen in today's video, as always, leave it down below. If not, thank you guys for watching. Until next time.